1 Samuel chapter 16. Basically, for November, I'm going to play kind of the coach, laying out the game plan, giving us that pregame pep talk, and making sure that we're all on the same page. And so let's start off with this statement that any coach may say in his huddle. He's going to say, everybody wants to win, but most won't. And there's always a loser and a winner. And Paul even said that in his letter to the Philippians, I believe it was. He says, don't you know that all run in a race, but only one can receive the prize? He said, therefore run that you may obtain it. Run to win. And that's become my new my verse, I guess. It's in my signature. If I'm sending it to somebody on email, it's running to win, because that's what I want to do. And as I said a couple of Sundays ago, I'm not here for second place, and I don't think you are either. And it doesn't mean we're in competition with other churches, but it means we're in competition with who we used to be. And that's always the case. Whether it's in personal development, whether it's in a business, or whether it's here at church, we're always fighting against who I was yesterday, so I can be better than that. And it goes for health, it goes for your mental state, it goes for your education, it goes for church and the work we do here. We're always trying to do better than we used to do, and that is how we grow and move forward. But we want to win because, as we said, we're victors, we're not victims. So tonight we want to discuss how to win. And the first thing we need to realize is that champions are not made in the ring, they're merely recognized there. One of the biggest deterrents to success and victory is the desire for immediate gratification. And we live in a microwave society where you pop it in and you hit 30 seconds and it's warm and you get to go eat it. But the reality is that God doesn't work that way, and really the world doesn't work that way. If you've ever owned a company, it didn't work that way. If you've ever done anything of significance in your life, you know there's no way to fast forward the process. In personal development worlds, this is always talked about. People talk about this all the time. If you try to follow people who do personal development and leadership classes and so on and so forth, they talk about these principles all the time. But in the church, we don't talk about it a lot. In fact, we talked about success. People kind of frown on that. Like, well, is that what we're trying to be? Is successful? Is that what God's word is? Well, I do want to be successful in what God gives me to do. I know He didn't give it to me to fail at, so it means I need to win at it. As Hebrews says, that we have a race to run, and as he said in Philippians, we need to run that race to win it. And we love to read great exploits from our favorite Bible characters, or even from our own history books of other great men, preachers, and missionaries, and just men in general who maybe sat on a pew but made huge impacts in the world around them. And we read their stories that they, as the one missionary said, expected great things from God, and they attempted great things for God. And I think it's William Carey who said that. And we begin to pray for God to use us similarly, or in a similar fashion. And we send revival the same way He did back then, as we say. But then we get up from our spot, and we so often get kind of on a high when we get to pray that, especially maybe we go to a revival service and we see a lot of stuff, a lot of movement, and we feel the passion of the moment. But we need to have something that goes past the passion. The original time I wrote this lesson, this message, was to speak, I think, to FCA, which is why it's kind of structured the way it is. And then I gave it to the youth at Trinity. So it's kind of a youth idea-oriented thing, like you're seeing a lot of stuff in front of you to do. But I think it happens to all of us. We get on highs. We see a bunch of stuff happen. As I said, we get real fiery and passionate about for a couple weeks. We go to maybe a special service or something, or we hear some music and we pray. We have a really good week with God. And then the next week, resistance hits, and then all of a sudden, all the passion we had is gone. In the youth world, we would watch this happen, and you could almost just watch it like clockwork, I guess you would say. We would go to something like a Rise or Hearts on Fire for us here, or to one of these big youth conferences, and the same thing happens. The first part of the week, nobody moves. The middle of the week, some begin to move. By the end of the week, everybody's on the altar, and they're crying, and there's tears, and there's boogers everywhere, right? And it's all this stuff, and everybody feels good, and we'll have the boys who would never do anything. They're down there at the altar hugging each other and praying. And then they get into the week after, and they aren't, they're fiery at that first week, and they'll come to the youth group once or twice or three times. And then about 4 weeks in, You start to see them disappear. And now next month, 2 months from then, you'll see the same people you had seen already in the past, and the ones who had committed. And I've watched a boy I can think now, great talent. He's a leader. He could have been, or he should have been, I should say, one of the biggest movers in the youth group to move men or people, because all the other boys followed him. Just you can see it. Naturally speaking, there are some guys who just have it, and they don't even know it sometimes. And he went to Arise a couple years ago. We took them, and he was all on fire for it. And again, within a few weeks, he's right back doing the same things, getting in the same trouble, if not worse. And we can do the same thing as adults. It's not just, restricted to youth. We can get on these highs. We can think about all the good stuff that's going to come. But to win takes work. And so we have to know what that looks like. In the world, we watch people, and talking about people who want to win, we can watch people read books from, trying to be successful in their businesses or their bodies. And on January 1st, we'll watch gyms fill up. We watch people buy planners and subscriptions and all this stuff, and they spend a bunch of money. If they want to get fit, they go buy these clothes and this food, and they buy the subscriptions to the gym, and they get in there like, I'm going to do this. I have this vision of who I can become, and they're all passionate about it. And stats say that by the third week of January, the majority of people have already abandoned their New Year's resolutions. And I think all of us in here have done that before, and you've probably done it multiple times, just like myself, because we get into this idea, but when it comes time to actually push past the passion, when it's cold that morning and you don't feel like getting up and you don't want to eat chicken for the 50th time, right? And all this stuff that you need to do in the physical side of things, and you're just like, well, you know what? I'm just not going to do that today. And then it turns into 2 days and 3 days and so on. The same thing with everything, You want to make money, and you're like, I'm going to start this new business, and you have these good ideas, and then you realize, this is late nights, early mornings. This is hard work. This is me showing up at a client's house at this time and spending my night making up quotes and all this other stuff, or researching the project that I'm going to do for them. And people just fall off. We see the benefits, as I said, Sunday morning. It's good to see the benefits of the mission, but as soon as friction comes in, the work that's involved, we kind of shirk it. And we see it in the world, and we experience it in the church, because the difference between the person who wants success and who actually is successful is this. It's their willingness to travel the distance between vision and victory. And let's look here in 1 Samuel chapter 16. You can see there in verse 1, it says, Now the Lord said to Samuel, How long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king among his sons. So this is the beginning of what's going to be the anointing of David. So this is how it happens. Saul, he gets in the power, he gets to lead, but then he begins to rebel, and every time God tries to turn him back and cause him to repent, he just won't, or he goes halfway, just like many of us have done in our life. And God finally rejects Saul. He's going to call David. And you know the story. David is out in the field being faithful, but he's forgotten. He's forgotten by his father, his brothers, by everybody else. While he's being faithful, he's in the background. He's doing the work he's supposed to do, and nobody notices. And we can overanalyze this and make all kinds of excuses for why we go into something, and we don't want to do the background work like David's doing here. But really what we miss a lot of times is the understanding of what Maxwell calls the law of process. If you've ever read anything by John Maxwell, he's one of the premier leadership people, and I love his work, and I've read or listened to him a bunch. But he's the one a lot of these quotes come from. And the one I mentioned earlier, that champions are not made in the ring, they're only recognized there, comes from one of his books, from the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And what in that saying is the secret to both success and failure. To win or to lose in the game of our life or our church in this sense, to fail the mission God's given us. If we want to beat the stats and not be part of that 90% who quit once we get in a little far into this mission that we're talking about this month, then we need to know exactly how to win here. And we need to understand this first piece here. A champion develops daily, but not in a day. So anybody who wins, it's never something that happens to them by luck. We have lotteries and stuff like that, and people sometimes there's chance and there's things that happen. But the greatest athletes, the greatest winners, the greatest preachers, the greatest churches are not people who accidentally rolled into success with their mission. They put work in daily, but not in the day. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 6, you don't have to go there, I'll read this, but he says, when you pray, go into your room or your closet, and when you shut the door, pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. And in that verse is this principle, that there's no such thing as an overnight success. And I remember hearing, especially when I worked in Florida for the contractor there, he was my age. We're both the same age. He's a lot more driven than I was at the time, and I learned a lot from him, even though we're more or less peers. He had the truck, he had the business, he had the house, he had all the stuff. And we would have new guys come on, and they would get bitter quick. And, all he does is drive around in his big truck. And, he's just the boss. He never shows up. He doesn't do the work. He doesn't do this. Just like if you ever been on any kind of job site or any business, the people who are doing the base work, they always get angry at the guy at the top who has all the money. But they don't see the process that went into years of time that person put in to build that business. And I got to start close to the beginning of the business that Adam had. And so I saw the things that he had to do to get to where he was when I left, and now today he has 50 to 60 employees, and they're building stuff all over the place. They're a couple $1 million company at this point. But it wasn't overnight. He had a lot of things that he had to go through and to sacrifice for. And there was one point where it was just me and him, because the one guy got fired, and that's kind of how I ended up learning a bunch of stuff, kind of force-fed it because I had to. And as we went forward, began to add one guy, and then two. And then when I left, we were about 15. And now, like I said, today he's about 60 or 70, I think. But it was not overnight. And so there's no such thing as overnight success. There's only private preparation and prayer that finds its public victory at a point in time. So for us as a church, it's the same thing. It may be that people think there's not much going on here. They may not have heard about us, or they may have heard about us for a long time, or whatever it might be. And one day, I believe, we'll be a pillar in Haywood County. We are going to move and shake the kingdom of darkness, put it that way, as we pursue what God has for us in His kingdom. If we stay faithful to prayer and to action, as we've talked about, we will become that. That is my vision for us, is that we become a major pillar. And I even talked to somebody about this the other day, even in specifics. I want us to be a major pillar in servicing and witnessing to and ministering to Pisgah High School. And that's part of something I'm already working on. I want to be a major pillar in this area, in our community, on this south side, I guess is what it is, more or less, on this little bowl shape of Haywood County at the bottom. And as we stretch outward, that we are not trying to take anything from everybody. I think Jerry said it the other day, there's 45,000 people in this county, just in Haywood County, who do not know Christ. That's more than all me, the Orchard, the Woodland, and West Canton, and all the other ones that I talk to and meet with on a weekly basis. It's more than any of us could do even by ourselves. We don't have enough right now to reach all of Haywood County, accounting for even all the churches that we have here. And so we need to be in the background right now. Before anything big happens, it has to be that we're on our knees and praying for those things to come, making sure that we're clean, as we said in our Sunday mornings, that we are holy, that we are righteous men and women who are praying effectual prayers. And one day, if we do it in the background when no one notices, one day it'll look like it come out of nowhere. But it won't be. It'll be because of plenty of nights and days put into this. And In his book, in John Maxwell's book, he actually used this story of Joe Frazier, which as I read about him became a centerpiece of my own life's philosophy. But Joe Frazier was a Golden Glove boxer in the 70s, and Smokin' Joe was his nickname. And he was known for intense, constant pressure that he would place on his opponents. So he would just keep moving. Even as by inch and inch, he would always have pressure. He wouldn't let them breathe. He wouldn't have to hit them as hard. He wouldn't do all the things everybody else did, but he was known for consistently pressuring his opponent to make them move. He would push and push with incredible endurance, and then he would come and he would finish his opponents with his left hook, because he was a left-handed boxer. And in 1971, March 8th, Frazier would meet Muhammad Ali for the heavyweight boxing championship of the world. When they came to that fight, neither man had ever lost in their professional careers. They're both undefeated. Obviously, we know Muhammad Ali, he had all his flash and his style. He would hop around, and he would use it to confuse his opponents and to kind of get them off balance. But Frazier would go 15 rounds with Ali, all the way to the end, and he would knock him down with that left hook that he was known for, and he would win the fight by unanimous decision. And the first boxer to ever hand Ali a professional defeat was Joe Frazier. But Frazier began his career in obscurity, working in a sharecropper's field. He had built his own heavy bag out of burlap sack from the farm. He filled it with rags and corn cobs and anything else that he could find. And for 10 or 11 years of age, he would hit that bag every day for an hour, every single day. And for 7 years, he practiced in the dirt of the sharecropper's farm, and he would punch this bag that he had built himself. He actually had an accident while he was on that farm, which damaged his left arm, the one he used the most. And it's interesting that it was the thing that should have held him back that actually what he became known for, because he had this habit of just continually pushing forward. But there was no glory in the beginning for Frazier. There were no crowds, there were no arenas, there were no names and lights. But the law of process, which is what Maxwell calls it, is unstoppable. We decide to apply constant pressure to progress. It becomes unreasonable that we would never see results. So this is where you begin to just put in, and even it's like putting sheets of paper on top of each other. When you put 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, it doesn't look like a lot. But you got 100, you start to see something. You put 200, and you got 1,000 sheets of paper, and you can't almost, I don't know how much 1,000 sheets of paper are, and you keep stacking it up until you can't even lift it. But each one is a single tiny sliver of a piece of paper. But if you add constantly over time, it's unreasonable that you would not see success. In everything we do here, nothing will happen fast. But if you just put in the prayers, as I always say, you got to put in the reps and the steps. You got to put in the daily work that is necessary for the mission to happen. The mission sounds good. It's just like we said on Sunday. Everybody sees the mission, and there's the promised land. But there's giants out there. There's big cities. You know how they won? When Joshua finally takes in their children of the next generation that actually goes in 40 years later, they don't fight all the cities at one time. They fight one city, and then another, and then another, and then another, right? And as they go, it's 1, it's 2, it's 1, it's 2. They just go. And it's one thing after another. It's not all at the same time. And that's what stops most people's progress. They want to see a bunch of results, and they think it can happen overnight, but it doesn't. It happens by consistent effort every day. And Frazier fought his heart out, and he had to run for his life after an incident with the sharecropper's son. It was still very much the segregated South at that point. And as him being a black man did not have the rights really, or at least they would not be extended to him. And so he had to leave where he was living and go on the road. And he fought in many dark rooms and in amateur bouts. He had people steal from him, look down on him, all the things you could possibly think of that would say he's never going to be successful. But the same consistent pressure he showed in the ring, he first showed in his life as he pushed forward. And Fraser is quoted as saying this: if you've cheated in the dark of the morning on your training, you will get found out under the lights. And that was his philosophy of life. That I trained in the background when no one knew my name, but when I stood on the stage with Ali, I won. Not because I was a champion there, because I'd been a champion all along, because I kept adding to myself day after day after day. And one of the most amazing stories of his life was that he was actually headed to the Tokyo Olympics in '64, which was his first major bout, but he was passed over for another guy named Buster Mathis. But his trainer said something interesting to him. He said, go to Tokyo anyway and be ready to fight. And Joe didn't want to do it, but his trainer convinced him, just go to Tokyo anyways, prepared to fight. And as fate, I guess, would have it, Mathis broke his hand, and Fraser was right there to replace him. And because he was willing to put in the work in the background, he brought home the heavyweight gold medal in that year at the Tokyo Olympics, because he was ready to do the work that nobody wants to do. You can't put in the work, if you can't put in the years of work that when no one knows your name, you'll never win, and you'll never be a champion. And prayer and the Christian life in general is very much the same. We push and we pray, we volunteer, we work, and most of the time, nobody knows. In fact, like I went to Gardner Webb I think 2 or 3 years ago, and they asked me to come and do kind of a leadership seminar for some of their leaders there. And we started to discuss what are the biggest issues when it comes to leading and volunteering. And, one of them said, I was serving somewhere, and I was wiping these windows to clean this old house that somebody was trying to move into. We're trying to help some family. And she said, I can't, I just felt like this is the dumbest job. Like, I don't want to do this job, and all this kind of stuff. But she said, you know what, I still need to do it. I felt like I needed to do it and follow through because it just needed to be done. And I said, that's a perfect example, cleaning windows. Because clean windows don't get noticed. Only dirty ones do. And that's volunteering in a nutshell. Nobody notices when you do it. They only notice when you don't show up. So it's very thankless, right? It's only like, well, why didn't you show up? Why didn't you do this? Well, I've showed up for 5 years. I've been on that committee for this many times. I've helped this. I've always been there to do this. And no one's ever said anything. Because when we do our jobs right, when we pray like we should, when we study like we should, we show up to our Sunday school and our small groups and all these other things, we volunteer or teach at or do stuff, usually you'll never get thanked for it. The only time someone will notice is when you're not there. But that's not the problem. That's not the reality. That's not what I should focus on. I should focus on simply showing up every day like we just said. And if we do that, and we push and we pray, then we wait in anticipation. And sometimes it's going to be years to see some of these things. But we're going to wait for God to show up and grant our requests. And it's rarely glamorous, and it's never easy. But if we put in the work, God will show us His glory eventually. And as Ephesians 3:20 says, He'll do exceedingly abundantly above all we ask or think. So there is always, the champion is made daily, but not in a day. The next thing is understand there's always a gap between vision and victory. And that's kind of where we're at here in 1 Samuel chapter 16. We go down to, you go all the way through the story. He looks at all his sons, and none of them are fit in God's eyes. And Samuel's a little confused. And he says in verse 11, are these all the young men here? He said, there remains yet the youngest. It's almost like an afterthought. Oh, yeah, there's one more. It's just David, though. It's just a sheep keeper. It's the youngest. He's the little guy. He's of no count, essentially, is what's going on here. He's out there keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and bring him, for we will not sit down till he comes. So he sent, and he brought him in. And now he was ruddy or red, with bright eyes and good looking. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is the one. And Samuel immediately takes the horn of oil, anoints him in the midst of his brothers, which I can't believe what that would have been like. Little David there with big, was it Eliab? And, big, strong, probably taller, broad shoulders, the one who's clearly the king, just like Saul was. Saul was a head taller than everybody else. He looked like a king. And David, I would assume, was probably not as tall. But he's in the middle of his brothers. There he is, getting anointed to be the next king of Israel. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel arose and went to Ramah, or went home. And here we see the beginning of the vision that David's given. He's out there doing the stuff no one else wants to do, and he does it consistently. We know that. We know that when the bear and the lion come, he doesn't just let them take it. He kills them, right? That's what he tells Saul later on. And we know from the Gospels that the MO of a hireling was to leave the sheep, to leave them there, that when the wolf would come or the threat would come in, the hireling leaves because they're not his sheep. And David saw the sheep, even though they were his father's, as though they were his own. He had the shepherd's heart, which is what God was looking for in the first place. And I think that's really what God meant when he said that he had a man after his own heart. He was a shepherd. He was someone who loved the sheep enough that he would go and fight the bear and the lion. And that's the spirit you see in David when he fights Goliath. It's the same exact person, just like Fraser, who in the background of his life as a young child, he's trying to pursue this vision he has of being a champion, and everything's in his way, but he just keeps pressing forward. David presses forward in the little things that he's supposed to do, which is simply being in the wilderness by himself, in the cold and the heat, as Jacob said in Genesis. He says to be a shepherd is to be in the cold and in the heat, and to bear the loss of the flock. That's what Jacob complains to Laban about in that story. So we know what it looks like to be a shepherd. There's no glamour. There's no lights. No one says, that's a great shepherd out there. You're just out there by yourself, burning in the heat, freezing in the cold, fighting lions and bears with rocks and stones. And when it came time for God to anoint a king, that's who he wanted. And when you see him face Goliath, it's because he was doing the same thing he always did. Just like I said to the men last night, when the men in our story from Sunday, we kind of went through some parts we didn't cover Sunday, but the men were called to be leaders, and their mission was not to go into this land and just spy it out. Their mission was to come back and lead the people into that land. That was the real objective that Moses sent them for. Because in the beginning of the chapter 13, it says they must be leaders. They must be heads of their father's houses. So they were being sent as leaders into this land so they could firsthand see the difficulty and the blessing, and they're supposed to come back just like Caleb and lead their people in. God was simply calling them to do what they had already done. They had already been leaders, and I want you to lead into this difficult, yes, but prosperous blessing I want to give to your people, and you're the ones chosen to lead. You're supposed to do what you've always been doing. But David, just like Caleb, does that. He's a shepherd in the field, and he's a shepherd when Goliath is standing cursing God's sheep, so to speak. And that's where vision and victory start to see some things in David that you may not see in other people, but understand there's always a gap, which I'll look at here in a second, between vision and victory. And consequently, the larger the vision, the longer the gap. And as we've seen Sunday, the vision, the mission is truly mountain-sized and beyond our capacity. And the gap between the two will always hold adversity and discouragement and even defeats. But no champion ever enjoyed victory without that process, without the gap. There's no victory without the gap between, which I'll explain here in a second. Without going through the valley between vision and victory. And Maxwell said we often overestimate the one event and underestimate the process. And as I said, you may not recognize Fraser. I don't know if you did or not, but you definitely recognize David. And here you see him being anointed king in chapter 1 of verse 13. Or chapter 16 of 1 Samuel. But if you go to 2 Samuel, go over to the next book, 2 Samuel chapter 5, we're going to see something happen here that's pretty spectacular, but that's going to kind of pull all these points together that we've been talking about. So he's 15-ish years old in 1 Samuel 16. He's a teenager in the middle of his teenage years. He's anointed king there. That's the vision given to him. There is a throne in your future. You will be the shepherd of my people, just like you were the shepherd of your father's sheep. That's the vision given in 16 of 1 Samuel. But 2 Samuel chapter 5 says this, "Therefore all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron. And the king David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord. And they anointed David king over Israel." David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. He's anointed king in 1 Samuel. That's the vision. The victory is here in 2 Samuel chapter 5. It's 15-year gap between the vision of ruling and the victory of being crowned. It's 15-year gap. 15 years between the sheepfold and the throne. There's no single event that will take us from failure to success, but it'll always be a step, a process of preparation. And when I wrote this message, I had been listening to the Bible on my phone, and I've been listening to it as I drive into Trinity for work. I drove about 30 minutes or so. So I would listen to it. And when you listen, you get to hear large chunks of the Bible all at one time. So you see a narrative and a story rather than it being like chopped up chapters a lot of times. It's a little bit easier to see that 1,000-foot view. And it gives you a better perspective. And as I said, those 15 years you see that are between are the period of the process it takes to get from failure or from this place to victory. In the process, there's often long sections where no progress seems to be happening. In David's life, if you know the story, if you've read through the Old Testament before and you can put all the pieces together, he obviously has the victory over Goliath, and everybody remembers that. But that was actually, as tall as it was in his, I guess on the tiers of victory, that was where things began to go downhill. Because that's where Saul begins to eye him, and then the people begin to sing songs about David and not about Saul. And then Saul begins to get jealous. And as he's riding victory, he's actually going down into that valley that's between victory and vision. He's falling through, and then he begins to run for his life. He has to escape to his enemies. He goes to Philistia to hide. And then he has to leave his parents with the king of Moab for them to be protected while he runs in the wilderness for his life. And if while he's doing that, there's no telling what's in David's mind. Actually, there is. You read in Psalms, there's a couple of Psalms in there, and he tells you, there are times where he's like, what in the world is going on? But he always ends his Psalms like we ended that one sermon 2 weeks ago with trust. He says, I don't feel good about this. Why is this happening? Why are the wicked succeeding and I'm not? Why is this happening? But at the end, he always brings it back to praising and trusting God. But he's in the process. He couldn't be king at age 15. He wasn't ready yet. He needed to go through Goliath. He needed to run for his life. He needed to see what would happen to him or what would happen to a king that didn't want to submit himself to God. He needed to see what Saul became. And he ran through all these setbacks, all the hopelessness and discouragement, the gap between vision and victory. But you notice, look at chapter 2 or chapter 5 there again in 2 Samuel. Notice what he had been doing all these years. Verse 1 of chapter 5. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and spoke and saying, indeed we are your bone and your flesh. So we're family. You know us, we know you. This is after he's run. This is after Saul's death. This is after everything. This is finally things are beginning to pan out as they're supposed to in the first place. Verse 2. Notice what they say to him. Also, in time past, when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and brought them in. And the Lord said to you, you shall shepherd my people Israel and be ruler over Israel. David was just being faithful wherever he was at. That's all he did. He didn't do anything special. He just kept doing what he had always done. Constant pressure forward, going through the process, trusting that God, even though it was difficult, even though it didn't make sense, even though the people who were supposed to support him and love him and protect him are the ones trying to kill him, he just kept moving forward. There were times of weakness, of pain, of loss, betrayal, division, of turmoil, and all the things you can think of. But you see in David's life, and if you look through the Bible, you'll see the same exact pattern follow through. You look at Joseph's life. He's, I think, 17 years old when he's given the dreams. He is 30 years old when he's brought out of prison, but he will be 28-ish or 38-ish years old by the time he actually sees his brothers and it all finally clicks. Because him being brought out of prison was not the vision he was given. The vision he was given was his brothers falling down before him. That was it. So even when he comes out and everything gets better and he's Prince of Egypt, he's second in command, riding in the chariot, wearing the gold chains and has all the bling and all the stuff that he was given, and he's married and he has children, and it's all the blessings of being free, of being a free man. The vision is not complete until his brothers walk in and they fall down before him, and then every single thing that God had said back at age 17 finally clicked. But it was 20 years of his life was spent from point A in 17, and he had to go through slavery, being betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, lied about by Potiphar's wife, forgotten about into prison, until finally God brings him out. And then finally, and then even then, 7 years go by of good fruit. The 8th year, famine begins. Canaan runs out of food. Jacob sends his sons the end of the 8th year, and then Joseph finally gets it all. And you see him at the end of Genesis say, I finally understand. You all meant it for evil, but I finally understand God meant it for good. In David's life, he ran for his life for 15 years. He tried to be killed by Saul multiple times. He had the opportunity to kill Saul, and he knew in his heart he just did what he always did. He was a man of integrity. He could not be crushed by the pressures that were on him. He simply kept moving forward, and God rewarded him. He rewarded Joseph. He rewarded Caleb, as we'll see Sunday. And he rewards those who trust him even when things are going bad and going difficult. Because if we want to win, there's work to be involved, and sometimes it doesn't look like what you think it's going to be. David, I'm sure, when Samuel, that old man, was sitting there, and Samuel's like, "You're going to be king," and dumps oil on his head, I'm sure he didn't foresee hiding in the caves and Saul walking in and him at that point having the opportunity and all the things that he went through. If we're going to win here, it's not going to be because of some one-time decision. It's not going to be because of this month. It's not going to be because of Vision Month. It's not going to be because of any one thing I say or anything that's really about me. I'm trying to convey what I think God's put on my heart, and it's really going to be all of us working together, and there will be parts of what I say that probably need to be chipped off a little bit, just like it always is, right? There's no perfect plan, but there's a vision and there's a mission to be accomplished, and if we just keep moving forward towards it with consistency every day in prayer and in action and in putting our time in, even when no one says anything, then we'll get there. And we'll get there and we'll be victorious. If you want to win, we have to go through the process of growth. Personally, in prayer, a relationship with God, and in champions, as I said, are not made in the ring. It's only after years of discipline and practice of smaller wins and losses that they finally one day someone recognizes them. And to everybody else, it looks like overnight success. But to that person, they know, I know what I paid to get here. And that's where you win. 20 years from now, there's a mountain-sized vision that I hope that we are all standing on top of, whether we're here or we're home with God, wherever any of us in this room are there at that moment. You will know, wherever you are, that we won. And that's what I want to see. And that's what we're pushing forward to. There's a place for us to be standing together, thanking God for what He's done, because we remember He is not unjust to forget our work or our labor of love, even when we're dead and gone. And that's what we'll talk about Sunday. Caleb was fighting for something that he would not fully realize in his life. He was fighting for the next generation. Abraham fought for the next generation. Everything Abraham did, he gave it up so that somebody else could get it. Caleb's the same way. This sort of victory cannot be achieved without consistent, effective prayer lives, as we've been talking about, where we're asking for big things and we're not settling for status quo, where we enter into our prayer rooms and without any kind of fanfare, no paparazzi, no pats on the back, no social posts, we just go in there and do the lonely sometimes. Sometimes we feel ineffective. Sometimes we feel like nothing's happening. But it's the sheets of paper. one at a time, every day. I'm adding prayers. God, remember this, remember this, remember this. And as we go, one day that little sheet of paper will build a mountain and we'll be where we're supposed to be. And that's how it works. Victory is always a collection of small little steps of discipline in the background. And one day you just end up winning. That's how we win. David did it, Joseph did it, Moses did it, Abraham did it. Every single person in there, you see, they grow in the grace of God and of men. As it said of Samuel, as it said even of Jesus himself. They grew, they added, they became into what God had planned for them to be. And that's what we do as a church. What we do as a person, you can do as a whole. That's why we're a family. It's a body. And that's what we're supposed to do. So I pray as you join me in prayer, and this Sunday we'll talk about some things, and then the next Sunday we'll have some actual written down initiatives, things that this specifically we want to pray towards these ends. Not every single thing I know and I think that I see, but there's some specific things that need to happen within the next 5 to 10 years that we need to do if we want to get to be the church that endures for another 150 years, say God carry. But at least until he does come back, right? So that's what we want to do.